are you doing? I know. Lots of fun. It doesn't matter, whatever you want to do. Yep. Yep, that's right. Yep. Let me check if Marty said he couldn't make it. I don't remember. Okay. He's not here. Marty's not here. So we're just waiting for Josh. It's like there's no holiday break yet. doing? Huh? No, it'll be fine. Yeah, for this one, people don't often make presentations, to be honest. Like for probable cause in particular, I think that, so these are a lot of my slides. They do have a bunch of pictures. But, what's your name? Laura. Laura, okay, Amelia, nice to meet you. Travis and Laura have a lot of pictures. Mike, I think, will be talking. You're making a presentation, right? I'm sorry? You're making a presentation, right? But just like speaking? Very short and like, okay. Perfect. So yeah, it's fine. Yeah, they have the letter. Yeah. So yeah, you should be fine. Okay. And your pictures are on the slides. Yeah.
Good evening. Today is December 18th, 2023, and this is the Historic Preservation Commission. We'll do a roll call, please.
Okay, Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Dunlap.
Here.
Commissioner Berg. Commissioner Dahlia.
Here.
Commissioner Keller.
Wonder if he can hear us.
Is he muted, Jeff? Okay. Commissioner Keller.
There he is.
He's not saying anything either.
He might not be able to hear us.
That says turn up the volume.
Do you think?
I don't know.
Okay, well, Chair Haley, we can finish out the roll. You're here. Hey, Keith, can you hear us?
Oh, he's on mute.
Okay. All right. Commissioner online. Hey, Keith, can you talk again so we can?
Hello?
There he is.
I wonder if they're behind. Because weren't they behind last time? I don't know if he's absent today either, because he's like, this isn't. So I wonder if they're just behind on minutes.
Ready to go.
Okay. All right. So we got Keith on. All right. Our approval for our agenda for this evening. Any changes or additions?
Motion to approve.
I'll second that
Second.
motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
And we were just noticing, the reason we were talking was there'd been not minutes from last week or last month. Okay. Any public comments on items that are not on our agenda this evening? All right, and our first item is 1155 Pine, and this is a probable cause, and we'll have a presentation from staff.
Okay. I just actually want to make sure before I start that Commissioner Keller can see the slides. Keith, can you see the slides on your screen?
Yeah, I think he said he, I can't
all
remember.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll check in with him during the applicant's presentation, just in case, so I'm a little worried about that connection. Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. This is a presentation on probable cause for 1155 Pine Street. You can see the area. It's just the northwest corner of Empire and Pine Street in downtown. So a few notes about the conditions of this structure over time. So the top left is from a 1930s aerial that was in your staff report. And then the bottom left is from a 1948 assessor's card. And then to the right are the current photos. So overall, this structure maintains its form and its footprint, although it does have new siding, windows, and a front porch. And then that rear addition, just based on looking at the 1930s aerial, it's not super clear, but it looks like the addition was added at some point after the 1930s, but the age, we don't have an age on it. So before I go through the criteria, I just want to speak a little bit about the home. It maintains its national folk home style, which we're familiar with in Louisville, and the HPC has reviewed previously. That form in particular, though it's relatively simplistic, it does have strong connections to mining history, and to, especially with that simplistic form, so often rentals to miners or owned by miners. And like I said, HPC has reviewed a number of these in the past. One of the interesting things about this to note is its location has an even stronger tie to the mining and railroad history than what we might see otherwise. So in addition to being a home for miners over the years, it's also actually in the a part of a sort of area of the railroad spur that would have served the mines. So it has that additional connection. Okay. And I also will note that the assessment would give more information, but the applicant has found what appear to be railroad ties in the foundation of the home. So again, this is sort of maybe a somewhat unique example of all these layers of connections to that mining history that don't show up on your average home. So we'll go through the criteria for landmarking. The age, it's around 100 years old. As I mentioned, it maintains that national folk form. Physical integrity has changed very little over the years. And then in terms of social significance, it was used predominantly as a rental property, mostly to coal miners. And it also has a number of ties to Louisville's ethnic heritage and immigration heritage, with French, Eastern European, and Hispanic residents known to have rented or lived in this house. So staff recommends a finding of probable cause that would allow up to $4,000 reimbursement toward the cost of a historic structure assessment. As I mentioned, the applicant does have a presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Nope.
All right. And then we'll have the applicant, and if you'll just state your name and city that you live in.
Had to do it. I have a little bit of fun here, and forgive me if I'm going off the rails. I'll try not to. Try to stay on there. But so my name is Travis Ramos, and what was the other? Did someone ask for something?
Oh, the city.
Your city of residence.
Oh, yes, City of Louisville. Yeah. So as you can see here, this is the overview map, and some of this is going to overlap with what Amelia already presented of Louisville. She presented this as well. Also, you saw this, and it's just kind of interesting to see this versus this, and where the property is currently located, right in the middle of what's called the Y of these three rails here, or railway here. And this was the photo that Amelia also showed a minute ago, the overall, and then the inset right here. And you can see the house is top left there. The one next to it's still there as well, but and you can see, just like Amelia noted, the lack of the structure, the part on the back of it. This is really cool because for me, you can also see the rails that used to go, not only that curve at the left, but also what you see, that white line is the berm of a railway that went to the right. It went over to the Acme mine by way of the grain elevator, and to the left, it went out to the Rex mines and then on to Lafayette, and that was the Colorado and Southern line. And as you guys know, this is just kind of frivolous, but I love this stuff. Louisville was built on mining, so I threw a few of these in there just because I loved seeing them, and it was relevant because where the house is located, where it is, because like I said, one way went to the mines one direction, the other way it went to the mines in the other direction, and on to Lafayette. And so, as you all know, Louisville is not only built on mining, but the way that all that coal made its way out of Louisville where it needed to go was the railway. If you look at the top right here, there's a train, and the caption of this photo was taking coal. I forget where it was, from one of the mines. And back to and I know this is about the car, so I'll try not to get too, I'm a little off the rails, but it's relevant to the history of the whole thing. So this is inside the CNS depot, which still exists today. This is on Pine Street, so the house would be to the right here, but just showing kind of daily life, or a little picture of daily life along the rails there. And then, bear with me, got a couple more slides. I'll go through these pretty quickly. But this is the Rex Mine, and the boxcar, I got to be clear, that is on the site, which I'll tell you guys or show you in a minute, not up for consideration for historical assessments or grants, but this is just kind of neat. So you see that Colorado and Southern boxcar there. This is at the Rex Mine, and then you see another one here at the Acme Mine. And then fast forward 110 years or so, and that's my son and I on the railroad tracks we just laid. And this boxcar could well have been this exact boxcar. The only number we can make out on this is the 4 at the end, and this boxcar is number 8064. So again, the boxcar is not relevant to this particular presentation, but I just thought it was kind of neat as part of the history and to just communicate that. So moving on, and this is, I'll actually touch back on this in a minute for when we're talking about the caboose. And the rest of this I will also touch back on in the other presentation. And the only other thing I'll say about the house, when we went in the cellar, and Amelia noted this, but it was built actually from parts of a boxcar. So when you go in the cellar, so boxcars, the old wood boxcars from the 1800s, most of them were, such as the one that I showed you, the spines that are underneath the boxcar are these huge, massive wooden beams. And if you go in the cellar of the house and you look up, so first if you go in the cellar, you open the door, and inscribed in the concrete is Pauline, I think it's Pauline DeSailly, so one of the people that lived there, 1955, and there's a date, I forget the date. It's just kind of neat to see that sort of thing for me from a historical perspective, and imagining their life and what it was like. But you open that cellar door, you see the inscribed in the concrete, and you go down, and you look at, I think, what are called the mud sills, which hold up the house itself, and they are pieces, they're spines of a boxcar. They still have the hardware in them, the square bolt hardware, in the beams themselves that are holding up the house. And so the house certainly, it needs love and and that sort of thing. But like Amelia denoted, it's still in its original form factor, more or less. Still has those boxcar beams holding it up. So we're really excited to be here and to tell you guys about it. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? All right. Any comments from the public before we turn it back to discussion? We don't have anyone online, right, as far as the audience? All right. So we'll bring it back for discussion.
It looks like it meets all of our criteria. Pretty straightforward, that we like to look at these houses and see the condition they are in structurally and what needs to be done to preserve them. So it looks reasonable.
Yeah, I would say it meets the criteria. When you're examining the main form, it's there. A lot of the accessory items obviously have been changed, but overall, I think it meets all the required items.
I'm also in agreement it meets the criteria. I support staff's recommendation to grant a grant for a probable cause assessment or historic structure assessment.
Is that a motion? Is that what you said? Or, oh, okay, sorry, I missed the first part. Yes.
But I could make a motion.
If you'd like to.
I move that we approve this grant for up to $4,000 for a historic structure assessment from the Historic Preservation.
All right, we'll do a roll call, please.
Right, Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. All right, and then our next item is caboose probable cause, I guess that's affiliated with 1155. Is that right, as far as an address?
It is at, yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but.
Yep.
Okay, yes, so this is the probable cause for the caboose. It's currently located at 1155 Pine Street. So a few notes about the condition over time and a little bit of the background here. So this was covered in your staff report, but just for the record, and to put it a slightly different way. So this is for the caboose alone. It's not for the boxcar, as the applicant mentioned before, even though that was mentioned in the application. So we're just looking at the structure that's pictured up here on the screen. The rails that are also mentioned in the application are also not part of this review. They're not eligible for landmarking because they don't have any evident historic title to Louisville, a tenuous one at best, and they have not been in Louisville for many a decade at the very minimum. So then up on your screen here, to bring it to the caboose, there is an advertisement for the restaurant that this caboose was originally brought to Louisville for, the Gandy Dancer. That's an illustration up there circled in green. And then you have some photos actually just from today, since it was removed over to 1155 Pine very recently, up on your screen. There are a number of changes that have likely occurred on this structure over time, just given its multiple uses. However, the condition that it's currently in makes it a little bit hard to assess how all it's changed, but you can see from comparing the images here that it's roughly in the same condition, maintained the same form. And just to note, this has come before the HPC as a demolition previously. So the history that we could piece together was in 2013, it was part of a referral for a redevelopment of the area that's up at Main Street and South Boulder Road, where it used to be located, where it was originally brought to Louisville. As you know, the HPC is a referral body for developments that affect the downtown area. So it was reviewed at that time for historic interest. And then also in 2014, it was released for demolition by a subcommittee, and that subcommittee's letter was included in your package. In your packet, it mentioned the age, and that it didn't maintain architectural integrity. And then most recently in 2020, it was also slated for demolition again. That was when the applicant acquired it. I didn't find any record of it going through an additional review at that time. So I want to note Commissioner Keller had asked what that letter meant when it said it didn't maintain architectural integrity, but unfortunately that letter is all I have. There's no other record about the reason that it was, what that means other than what's in the letter itself. So before I get into this, I'm just going to talk sort of generally. The age of the car is unknown, but it was purchased and brought to Louisville around 1971, 1972 is when the actual restaurant that it was being used for came to Louisville. It was part of what was called at the time and was still known today as the Coal Creek Station development, which was sort of an attempt to bring Main Street farther north, sort of the beginning of that redevelopment and sort of broadening of downtown. It was a restaurant, I thought this was particularly interesting, that was placed near a railroad line, and so it seems like potentially that was the connection, to not irritate people by hearing the rail go by, that thought maybe just let's lean into this connection. And so ostensibly that's the reason why they decided to bring this caboose and these other rail cars that have been demolished, and open a restaurant in 1972. This has an interesting history in terms of its existence in Louisville. So it was an active restaurant use for about 25 years. And then around 2000, it was closed and was vacant for basically until 2020, at which time the applicant raised funds to move it off of the property. And I'm sure they'll cover that more in their presentation. Just because this one's an interesting case and we don't see these types of things very often, I'm going to belabor the point a little bit more about staff's recommendation and the review of the criteria. So certainly this caboose has an interesting history. It connects to the history in Louisville of adaptive reuse, right, that we talk about quite often. And that's specifically often related to structures that are repurposed related to mines or railroads. So it fits very well in that story. In addition, it also represents a little represented history of the 1970s development of Louisville, and that's actually the beginning of Louisville's growth that it experienced for over 30 years. So it does tell this well-represented and also less represented story. However, the rail car is not original to Louisville, which is the case of a lot of structures that have been moved into Louisville, but it's not from around Louisville. It was only brought a little over 50 years ago to the area. And it does not also have any historic association to the property where it's currently located. So landmarking would require fairly significant and careful on-site interpretation. And of course, we're not considering landmarking tonight, but it's worth noting that if this were to be landmarked, it would need a fair bit of interpretation on-site to make sure that the history was accurately represented. People weren't given sort of a false sense of what was going on. So that's certainly something that staff believes is possible to do, but it would be necessary. And then finally, just want to note that Commissioner Dahlia actually asked a little bit more information on landmarks that are not buildings. And so we do have, the City of Louisville does have a couple that are not, and they are both signs. So there's one that's an iconic sign designation, it's not technically landmarked, and then there's also the Blue Parrot sign, of course, which is owned by the city and is landmarked as its own separate item that can be moved around and placed, you know, sort of wherever the city decides to place it eventually. I also want to note that the miners' cabins, which are the Trot Downer cabins, also have sort of a similar history. They are buildings, but they're sort of small structures that could be easily moved and were in fact moved to the place where they are currently, the baseball field. However, again, those are city-owned. So this would be the only movable, semi-movable, I mean, it's not an easy feat, but right, semi-movable structure that would potentially be landmarked down the line that is not owned by the city. That all being said, we're looking at probable cause tonight. So reviewing these criteria, like I said, the age is unknown, 51 years at least in Louisville. Certainly has a unique use as a restaurant, even though it's not original to Louisville. It's a unique structure, and therefore our staff finds that it has architectural significance. It also maintains the railroad or the rail car form. Of course, the condition, just based on a site visit alone, would necessitate significant restoration. And then again, as I mentioned, the social significance is, staff finds it certainly there with the restaurant industry connection to Main Street, that 1970s redevelopment of Louisville, and then also a number of memories of residents and nearby residents coming to Louisville and for dining in this, in the caboose. So finally, that brings me to staff's recommendation, which is a finding of probable cause, but with a condition. So as I mentioned before, this was moved to 1155 Pine just a couple of weeks ago. Previously, it was, I believe, actually in Boulder County, but it is not in its current location. And given the recent history of the last couple of years of moving a lot, staff thought that it would be appropriate to put a condition on the approval that the applicant, were they not to get reimbursed within the next year, that they have to come back to this body and go through the same process to be reimbursed. That would be even if they had gone through the assessment process and simply just hadn't asked for a reimbursement. The logic here is, again, just so that, you know, there's no probable cause expiration. 5 years from now, if the applicant moves it somewhere else or somebody else owns it or buys it and moves away, no one's able to come back and say, well, we'd still like $4,000 or actually $9,000 in this case, reimbursement for a structure that's not even in Louisville anymore. So our best estimate to how to approach that was to use this condition. So anyway, the finding would be for a structural assessment of up to $9,000, given that this does have exclusively a commercial use history in the city. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and the applicant will also have a presentation on this.
I have just a couple. The caboose versus the boxcar. Does the fact that we're looking at the caboose tonight mean that the boxcar could come in a subsequent application?
The boxcar would probably not be able to come to Louisville until like 50 years later.
Okay. Okay. In 9K versus 4K, commercial versus residential, based on the history of it being commercial, it doesn't have to be a commercial building or structure or entity going forward.
That's right. So the general reason for those two different numbers is actually the size of commercial is usually much bigger, and those assessments are much more intensive. It is also on a residential property. So certainly, if that's up for interest, I think there would be reasoning to grant 4,000 rather than 9,000. It is also a smaller structure than a whole building. The reason that staff chose this is because it was a commercial use and potentially would be a commercial use in the future, and so just sort of went with that side of the logic,
But it can't be a commercial use in the future in the property it's on.
Yes, that's a great question. It could be.
Okay.
Yes.
It could be. I thought it was residential zoning.
Well, it's not. So this is a very interesting area of town. I will summarize it by saying it's a mandatory rezoning area. And so that means it's part of the Highway 42 development redevelopment plan. This is currently a residential use, and all of the properties on that are sort of on that block are all residential. However, any extensive change or any attempts to put really even a large structure, even a new residence, like scrape the residences and rebuild them, would in all likelihood trigger a mandatory rezoning to some type of mixed-use commercial use. So it's possible for this structure to be used, and it's currently on what is a residential property by use, but any change, it would actually need to become a commercial use. And in addition, it is zoned currently commercial community. So there's some layers there, but absolutely, it's likely that it would eventually become, I mean, I can't speak for the applicant, but in terms of the city's perspective, this is slated for commercial and mixed use.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I think that was a lot of my question.
We had previously the foundations next to the historical museum had the metal shop building structure on it. That's another one that's migratory in nature too, that has some historic setup, correct?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry, I forgot that one. Right. It's not currently landmarked, but that's something that was seen recently, and the story is very similar there in terms of why it's desirable to have it reused, why it would be desirable to have it be landmarked, et cetera.
Okay.
And that one, correct me if I'm wrong, is slated to be developed across the street, almost directly from this structure.
Exactly, yes.
Any other questions for staff?
I don't think so.
All right, thank you. And then we'll have the applicant again, and if you can do your name and city of residence, just for the public record.
Travis Ramos, City of Louisville. I'll refrain from blowing the whistle again, but I brought it because it speaks to the social significance that Amelia alluded to when she presented. So this was what we call Crane Day. It was actually a leap year day, February 29th, 3.5, almost 4 years ago now, a week before the first pandemic lockdown went into place, actually, which is kind of crazy, but that's why there's so many of us in the picture. But this was when we saved the caboose. We craned it out. And there's a whole backstory there, but something that I experienced that I didn't think, just didn't think about ahead of time, I think our family experience is how much the community cared about this structure, the caboose itself. We moved to Louisville about 11 years ago, and so we don't have the history that a lot of people here do. And there's so many instances, and I'm gonna share a few that I'll never forget. And one of them is when a friend and I, Brian Weber actually, who works in the office right there. So my boys and I, we first started digging the caboose out. It was just us. It was a cold October day, and Brian joined us. And it was, my boys and Brian, and this woman walks by. Her name was Mary. She had her dog, and she walked by, and she just kind of shouts up, because I was on top of the caboose, and she said, "I used to take my smoke break up there." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She's like, "Well, I worked in the restaurant. I used to take my smoke break right up on, on the cupola there, which is the part that sticks up off of the caboose there." And it just struck me, like, just this, imagining her sitting there, whether it was the 70s or 80s, I don't know which restaurant it was, or the 90s, taking her smoke break up there. And then once, the story kind of hit the news and started to grow and grow, I had so many people reach out. The trucking companies, that truck right there to the right, Elias Ortiz grew up, his parents owned the last restaurant that was in, that the caboose was part of, and he grew up after school every day. He'd walk from Louisville Middle School to the caboose, and he would hang out in the cupola, do his homework, hang out with his friends, that sort of thing. And he ended up being the one driving the truck that took the caboose to its new location, which was just kind of neat. And then another one I'll share real quick is the reason that I brought this whistle, and you see things written all over it, is because of this night and the story that goes along with it. So this was a few nights before Crane Day, and what's going on inside is has to do with this person. So this is Abby Schutze, and this is a picture of her. She worked in one of the first restaurants that the Caboose was part of. It was Coal Creek Station. I think the Gandy Dancer was the first one, and then Coal Creek Station, I believe, was the second. It may have been the third. I'm not exactly sure. But she was one of the wait staff there. And when she heard about the old Caboose and being saved, she contacted me. And before I knew it, she'd invited me to coffee, but she didn't tell me this. She had also, it gave her reason to reconnect with a few other people that she worked with as wait staff in the restaurant back in the 70s. And so I find myself sitting among, it was me, Abby, and 3 other women, and just talking, they were just sharing stories all about the Caboose. And so what we did a few nights before the rest of the building was demolished is we invited her and her wait staff to what we called one last dinner in the Caboose. And real quick, this is on Main Street in the parade. She shared all these pictures with me. It was a parade that was from the, for the restaurant, or it was part of this float was for the restaurant, part of the parade. I don't know which parade it was, but this is kind of epic because it's the Empire and everyone's sitting on top. I love it. This picture inside, and a picture inside as well, but from almost 4 years ago now. So we did one last dinner in the Caboose, and we invited the old wait staff. This is gonna make me cry. And to one last dinner in their old Caboose. And it was just, for me, such a cool experience. But again, speaking to the social significance of this and all the people that came out of the woodwork and said, that means something to me as a resident of Louisville or Boulder, or even people who are no longer residents but spent time. Heck, right here, I just met this guy. What was your name? Cody. I just met Cody, and he brought up that he grew up in Louisville and remembers it as the Brothers Tree. But so many people have come out of the woodwork and have told us and shared with us how important this structure is and was to them. And then, of course, if you guys saw the parade, you may have seen it in the parade this past year, and it was pretty cool to have the coming back and have everyone see it come back. And then this is us placing it on site where it is now at 1155 Pine, where we relayed a section of the Colorado and Southern Railroad almost in the exact same spot that it was 100 years ago, and placed the Caboose there. So that is all I've got. But and I guess a couple quick notes about the Caboose as well. I don't know if it's pertinent or not because the Louisville history versus the Caboose's history, but it was actually built between 1913 and 1915. It spent the first 30 years or so of its life as a boxcar, and then as part of the effort for World War II, production, everything, as you guys know, was scaled up, and so there were 44 boxcars of this type, which is a hybrid. It's basically a big metal cage, but it was when they were experimenting going from wooden cars to all metal cars, and it was a hybrid. And so, but what they did as part of the war effort is they turned this Caboose into a boxcar, so the cupola on top is all metal. And then it rode the rails for about 30 years, and then was placed here in Louisville. I actually just talked to a gentleman named Jimmy Keith. This was 3 days ago. He heard about it because it was on the news again recently, and he said, I worked for the company that was disposing the assets of the railroad at the time that the Caboose belonged to, and he's the one that assessed the Caboose before it came to Louisville. So it was just kind of neat, and I'm a little off the rails here, so I'll reel it in. But that's a little history on the Caboose. Built in 1913 as a boxcar, converted to a Caboose as part of the war effort, rode the rails for 60 years or so, and then ended up in Louisville and became a very, very important thing, structure to many, many people here. And so I just want to say again, thank you for your consideration for the Caboose.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
I have a question. So thank you. Oh, go.
We might have more. Yeah, you can stay here because we might have more questions for you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you for your presentation. The Caboose has been out of the public eye for a few years now, and now you brought it back. And I'm just curious why this location and also how it will potentially tie into to 1155 Pine.
So this location, this property wasn't for sale, but we looked at it and I contacted the owners, really, really sweet couple named Jerry and Alice, just live over in Lafayette, or the previous owners now. And we told them about our vision and what we wanted to do, rebuilding a short section of the Colorado and Southern, because we realized that it ran almost in that exact same spot over a century ago. So we said, this is what we want to do. It's kind of the East Gateway coming into downtown. It's so visible. Rebuilding a section of the Colorado and Southern from a just historic perspective, to me, it's just really, really cool. And placing the caboose there, and then, the story of the boxcar is really cool. But found the boxcar outside of Louisville on a farm. It's one of 2 known remaining ones. But building this basically end of an early 1900s train, and the vision being, if the house, if we can landmark and restore the house to similar to its original state, and then have the caboose and the boxcar, it is, to me, just this epic entry point into downtown Louisville, adding to the character and to the vibe of our downtown area. And it's still up in the air. We don't know what we ultimately want to do with it, if it's going to be something commercial, because I think Amelia alluded to it's like a mixed-use residential, or something like that, and it would kick it into commercial if we do a certain amount of development there or something like that. But on the one end, even if it just ends up, it is just this beautiful thing as you turn into the East Gateway to downtown, representing a bit of our town's history, both theoretically and actually, with the trains, mining, the history, all that stuff. Just thought it would be something that would really add a lot to our downtown area. Yeah. Any other questions?
So you do not have any plans for the caboose right now at this point, besides just this initial step?
And just to be totally blunt, we're very tapped after buying this property and moving the caboose, moving the boxcar, laying the rails, most of which, except for the heavy equipment, we've done ourselves.
Yep.
And so it's hard to think okay, if I could wave a magic wand, it'd be kind of neat and be like, oh, what if this? But right now let's make them look good, look presentable, and then explore, working with the city, what could it be? We already know through initial conversations, it can't be something that's like high traffic commercial because of actual traffic considerations, pedestrian and otherwise. But what could it be? Could it be some kind of event space, or because the courtyard behind it is a pretty decently sized area? Could it? I don't know. I imagine like a stage with a bluegrass band, playing, flanked by the caboose and the boxcar, or something. There's a lot of ideas that we floated around, but not real sure at this point. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Fair enough, yeah.
Okay.
So obviously the caboose was inhabited as far as like having a restaurant in it, so like plumbing and up to code and all that kind of stuff. Is that something you're considering for, obviously you're saying I'm not sure, but I guess, and that might be kind of a city question too, but like what are the logistics of what that would, as far as like its usage as being habitable and all that, what would that look like?
Yeah, so currently it's permitted more as ornamentation. And that's what we can do. Right now we can't consider even permitting for something greater than that. And so that's where we're at right now. Next step, once we are able to at least restore the exterior, is thinking about, okay, what would it take to run electricity, gas, heating, air, and it would be similar to, the house is 500 square feet. It's not that much bigger than the caboose itself, for example. So it'd be a similar thing to if you would add all those items to a small home or to a small structure, or if you think about a tiny home, for example, and how you'd equip that. That's kind of what we're thinking. Yeah, certainly possible. The degree to which it was plumbed into the restaurant, it had actually like a furnace that was in the closet under the cupola. So it had its own little furnace that was in there and stuff, and electricity running to it and that sort of thing. But, yeah. Oh,
and as far as it being mobile, like, I guess that's kind of my question too, is like having plumbing, like that's all okay with the city as far as like plumbing into a movable structure or that kind of thing.
So it is currently, if you hooked up, I don't know, a winch to it, you could actually move it. It's 45,000 pounds, so it's quite heavy. but it's technically it's movable in this moment right now, but it very soon will not be, not at all. When we rescued it from where it was before, it was welded to the tracks in 172 different places because I cut free every one of those welds and it was terrible. It was welded to the tracks. The wheels were actually welded to the box car or the car itself. So it was a fixed fixture, structure. Did not move an inch. Right now you can be in it and you're like, I'm riding on the rails because it kind of like sways back and forth. But if we get to that point, and I'm sure permitting, structural, and otherwise would say this is what needs to happen, but it happened before, and all those things, I mean, it would be me just welding it back together, or welder, or whatever, welding, back together to make it like a fixed building. That's a long-winded answer to your question, but yes.
I think you were going to say something else. I interrupted you. You were like,
and structural, looking the same as it did before and having not changed very much. This is, it's a minor detail, but the beams that you see on the outside, when it was part of the restaurant, 4 of those vertical and then diagonal beams were actually removed. And then before we moved it from the site that it was on, to maintain structural integrity, because I just didn't know if we crane it out, is it going to be weird if it doesn't have those supports? But B, I wanted to make it just like it was. So I had those same beams fabricated in the same exact style and, cut, fit, and welded them to the side in the same style. So it is, with replacement wood, it will be in form and function just like it was originally, when it was on the rails. Yeah. Any other questions?
Any other questions? All right. Thank you. And then any public comments? Oh, and if you come up to, it's very official. If you, will just state your name and city of residence.
I'm Cody Qualls, and I live in Louisville, Colorado. It's curious to me that I ended up at this hearing tonight because I did grow up here, and that caboose is definitely a part of my childhood growing up here, and the families that lived in downtown Louisville frequented that restaurant, and it was a struggling restaurant. It struggled for years, and I think it was the Brothers 3 for a while, but I feel like it was, in my childhood, it was a couple of different restaurants, if I remember correctly, and I feel like the kids that I grew up with, if they were here, would say that this does have a historical significance to the city, and at least the city that we grew up in, especially the city that we grew up in before all the money came in from the coasts. Louisville has changed dramatically since the early '80s, and yeah, I'm honestly really glad that I was here to just be able to say this was, this touches my heart that he's doing this and that he has this vision to have this moment when people drive in to have some historical significance of the city, and that there's even possibly a vision. I'm a musician, and to have a vision of an event center where people could create community or have bands, it's incredibly exciting, especially when it's rounded out by the actual, it's not just progress, it's like progress encapsulated by its history. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. So.
Thank you. And again, if you'll just state your name and city of residence.
Mike Dvorsky, 601 Pine Street here in Louisville. I ate in that restaurant. My family used to dine there quite often. My sister is one of the people in that photo who was a server there in the 80s. So yeah, I have connection to this. They were a customer of ours. They bought Italian sausage and bratwurst every week. So, and Mary, she was a server in the 80s. And so I can attest to that. And it's really inspiring to me and refreshing as well that young fellows like Travis and this gentleman here have an appreciation for our heritage and our history. And even though the caboose wasn't really a part of that, as far as in its day, at least moving forward from the 80s on or 70s, and I knew the restaurant in the 80s, and it was successful. Terry Grawl was a very, very sound operator, and his partner, John, I don't recall his name offhand, but really solid operators. So throughout the 80s, it thrived, and then into the Brothers 3 and moving forward, that's when it seemed to struggle. But it was a great place. It attracted people. There were a lot of Denver Broncos that came to town and ate in town back then. It started with Larry Kaminsky, who was a partner of my father in our business and started it in the furthest 10 foot of the Huckleberry. And then ultimately we moved to where we're at. So yeah, to me it has some tie and some significance, and I think it has some value to the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
And we grew up as kids also knowing that it wasn't a part of the original, like, Louisville. We learned that it wasn't really from Louisville. I don't know if you know who John Leary is, but he was my neighbor. And so I learned quite a bit. I was surrounded by, Italians. And so even though it wasn't a part of Louisville, as the kids growing up in Louisville, we learned that it wasn't a part of Louisville. So it's I don't know, there's like a little, it's really cool to be here, honestly. I just wanted to add my yeah. Thank you, sorry.
You're good, thank you. All right, so I'll close our public comment and we'll bring it back for discussion.
So I just want to thank Amelia for the comments you made about other structures in Louisville that have been landmarked. Either it wasn't in the staff packet or I didn't notice it, but the things like the signs, Blue Parrot sign, and the cabins, which are structures that have been moved, just for some more context to this, in terms of Louisville's unique history of moving things around, including residences, is something to consider here. This is a little different, and that's not owned by the city, so that's something to consider for sure, because the city has obviously less control over this and what happens to it in the future. So I just wanted to kind of put those thoughts out there again.
I appreciate the enthusiasm of people bringing forward a project like this. It doesn't fit as well as Amelia mentioned with our traditional landmarking of structures. It's sort of not a structure per se. However, our landmarking process is very detailed in the city ordinances, and it talks about the history and looking at parts of it, evaluating, getting the structural assessment, and then doing a landmark thing. But our charter as the commission is more broad than that. It's to be responsible for historic preservation in Louisville. So it may be that we're going to have to think more broadly about this, that it is not just a structure that meets our current ordinances. And certainly our plan matches up with the state and national level preservation. And while structures are landmarked at the national level, there are also other things too that are not structures, that are part of the history that's been preserved. So it might stretch our imaginations a little, but I really appreciate it as happening.
I would say the history is a little different with something like this than we typically think of it as well. But I mean, some of the items that I can definitely, respect and get on board with is just a reconnection of what some of the other history that really was there as far as where the rail lines went, what the, back side of Louisville was at one point, and the connections there. So even if it has a little bit of its own story, and it definitely seems like it has stories with it, because I've seen it since I've moved here 25 years ago, that, it will have its own story entity being, but I think it could connect back to the previous, 75 years before that or whatever else, and help bridge that connection too. So I think it's kind of an interesting question that we have to ask ourselves.
I personally don't have any trouble that it's not a building as a structure. I mean, I know we landmark and nationally and statewide and other localities, places, signs. So I'm really not troubled with that at all. And I'm supportive of staff's recommendation to give it the grant with the qualification that it expires if it's moved. I guess I would foreshadow a little bit about what might likely be a subsequent hearing in front of HPC down the road. And I think it would be challenging, I would find it challenging as a taxpayer to spend a very large portion of the historic preservation fund for ornamentation to the city. So I think that, you know, again, thinking about where this is likely going to go, the more robust, interesting the plan is for this, I would find more interesting. The more it's ornamentation, I would find it whimsical. And not to, you know, be pejorative about that, but it would, I think that would be a big consideration about how I would think about, again, as a taxpayer, future funding. And I think that's how we should think about that.
A historic structure assessment here could do a lot of good. I think it'd be, you know, it's been moved a couple times. Looks sturdy out there, but it'd be worth, in my mind, spending the money to kind of learn more about the structure. I think it does meet our criteria. I think the social history is rich. I love that it's adaptive reuse of something that was here and, you know, is being repurposed for the community. So, but I'm with Randy as well that it's important to like know this program and what the next steps would be, because you know, the HSA is for something that there's probability that could be landmarked. With this, like that's, to me, it would be more up in the air depending on what happens with the information you learn and the plans that move forward with that. So, you know, we typically, I think, release funds when we think there's likelihood of landmarking. In this case, I'm not sure there is, but there, you know, is a lot to be said for this, learn more about the structure anyway. So I do think it fits our criteria. So I would be in support of the historical structure assessment.
I have some reservations. I was actually part of the HPC when it came before us the first time. So I remember a lot of the conversation we had around it. And I think one of the things that stuck with me was just the fact that, well, at that time it also wasn't 50 years or older, or hadn't been in Louisville 50 years older. So that was one huge piece, which now it barely is. But just the fact that the caboose itself wasn't at that point even wasn't historical to Louisville. So I think that's one of my hang-ups, is just that it's not, the caboose itself doesn't have significance, except that it was brought in the 70s. And I think the other piece that's hard for me is it sat vacant for so long. I think like that's, I don't know, just some of that lost time, and obviously having a business in a caboose is probably really hard also, but I think and then my third piece is having it, I just worry that it's false history, being like putting a caboose that wasn't original to Louisville on a like kind of renewed railroad, you know, like kind of recreating the railroad. So those are just some of my reservations that I guess that's more of the integrity piece and social history piece. I think the history of the actual restaurant is sweet and amazing, but there's just some dissonance for me. So yeah, and then I think I also have reservations about just kind of future use, and I don't know, and then too, like it being us deciding if we're gonna have probable cause as a commercial versus residential, because kind of based on what we choose would also go into if they do landmark, are we gonna landmark as a commercial, which would be a much greater grant possibility versus residential. So anyway, I just have, I think, a lot of reservations maybe, so. Yeah.
Even with those questions being outstanding, I think we often like to have the assessment done so we know what the nature of the beast is, what it will take to preserve it, how it fits into our history, that sort of thing. It
Well,
might be
probable cause
difficult.
is saying, would it qualify? Like, would we say that it, like, if they did a historical assessment and say, yes, we would like to landmark, we would basically, unless it was, so I guess the main thing for me is deciding, like, would this be something that we would want to landmark? Not based on the, not based on the structure and its condition and all that kind of stuff, but based on like our criteria, like, is this a good fit for our program, and two, I mean, it's going to be in a very prominent spot, and is this something, like, is this the best use of our funds? Is our community, like, does this meet with our landmarking criteria?
So just a point of information, the 9,000 for the historic structure assessment will help us determine if it's landmarkable, correct? We're not deciding tonight to landmark it.
And that's the kind of we're not deciding if we landmark it, but if we give historic, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but if we are deeming something like eligible for historic structural assessment, we're kind of saying, like, this would meet our qualifications. Like,
Would you like me to pull up the language
sure,
in the resolution?
That'd be awesome.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so this is section 7 regarding probable cause in Resolution 17, Series 2019. Okay, at a regular meeting, the commission shall review the building history, application, and other relevant information to determine whether there is probable cause to believe the building may be eligible for landmarking under the criteria in section 1536 of the Louisville Municipal Code. If probable cause is not found by the commission, a building assessment grant will not be issued. If probable cause is found by the commission, the owner shall be eligible, as we know, et cetera. Such grants shall be solely to offset a portion or all of the cost of conducting the building assessment. A finding of probable cause is solely for the purposes of action on the building assessment grant request and does not guarantee any outcome at subsequent hearings by the commission or city council. So I think my understanding is that it's a little bit of both of what you're saying. And it's very clear that a finding of probable cause here does not mean that it will be landmarked. It's very clearly within your purview not to landmark it for any reason that you're reviewing tonight or any future reason that comes up. In addition, I do know that the HPC has had conversations about wanting to expand the knowledge of the program through this assessment process, in addition to learning more about the structure, its history, its social history, frankly, sometimes, and then also its architectural significance and physical integrity. So I do think that in the past it's been used a little bit more expansively.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think with that as a background, and I do appreciate the points about how authentic is the history. I think after $9,000, we'll have a better appreciation of how authentic the history is, and I think we can determine whether or not it's really a landmarkable structure or not. And based on what Amelia just read, I assume, I mean, we're not landmarking tonight.
Very clearly, no.
Yeah, So,
And so would you want to landmark it as a commercial building then? I mean, probable cause, like HSA is a commercial?
you know, given the questions I asked earlier about the mixed use of the development that's likely going to be done, I would think of it more expansively as commercial versus residential. I don't really see it as a residence personally. I see it more as, I mean, you think about it as a potential meeting area, band space, pavilion, a lot of opportunities. I think that could be rich. I think of it as if it's only a signboard to welcome to Louisville, here's our train, I think that's underwhelming. So I think those are the choices, but I think there's a lot of decision ahead of that. But tonight, I think we're talking about $9,000, and I would be supportive of the commercial.
And so, and this, if we, with landmarking too, this is just kind of hypothetical, but if we were to do the probable cause tonight as commercial, would that be what it would be for landmarking as well? Like once we set that trajectory, is that the trajectory we stay on? Because to Randy's point, you said like ornamental versus substantial something. And so that too would be like if we said, you know, we're going to do commercial HSA, but then we decide like, what, like, does that make sense? Like at what point do we decide whether it's residential or?
Absolutely. And with humility, since I have never encountered this exact scenario, I think that it's fair to say that this is based on its use, potential use, and its past use currently. But if there was new information that came before the commission that would, I mean, the grant is completely separate, right? It's completely separate process, completely separate resolution, that it would be completely fair to count it as residential if that was what it was proposed as. So I think you'd be safe to keep those separate.
If the applicants, if we were to approve this, if they were to come back with the historic structure assessment in hand to landmark this, I think that would be, whenever that might be, and whatever role those of us here might play in that, and the applicant, I would like to see more public notice around that landmarking discussion for the community at large to have more opportunity to weigh in on that. I think it's really great that two community members were here who just happen to not only have an interest but a connection to this and had the opportunity to comment. But this, if it was up for landmarking in that location, that is a very prominent location. There's a redevelopment going on in that area. When it were to come back for landmarking, maybe we'll know more what that will look like and how this would fit in. So that would be, one thing I would like to see happen. I also am sensitive to what Commissioner Haley brings up about, I'm not sure if this is the correct word, but the kind of misinterpretation of history with it being there, on not those same tracks, although there were tracks there, of course, and that caboose, not exactly. I love the historical connection back to the 70s and the restaurant and the community members who remember that. But that caboose was not there. So just one thing I'd like to also put out there is, the importance of then, I would hope that whatever development plans are for this would include information on the history of it, the accurate history of that location and of the caboose. So again, if we move forward with the probable cause, the way Amelia read it there, it is, it's sort of both. It's not necessarily saying we're approving landmarking, definitely not saying that, but it is giving us more information on this to learn, to kind of keep thinking about these things, which the community at large have the opportunity to do for sure.
So I guess going back to the structural assessment, what information would we gain that would either persuade or dissuade us compared to the information we have tonight? Does that make sense? So that was kind of one of the questions too, is like, what would we learn about the structure that would either seal the deal or say, because I feel like with houses, there's all, who knows, like, and with foundation and all that, there's so many things that we may say, oh, like this condition of the house is not, like, it's too big of a, it's not inhabitable, or it's not, it would take too much money to get it up to where it needs to be code-wise or whatever. So I guess that's my question too, is like, I feel like this is fairly straightforward because there's not a whole lot to it. And so that'd be my only question too, is if we were to say the train's in perfect condition and just look at like the history, all that stuff, like does that make sense as far as probable cause? So not looking at like the structural and all that, but like the history, place, all that. That would just be, does that make sense? Because it's hard to separate those two and to be like, well, you're kind of curious, but just kind of, so that's just my personal curiosity from everyone is.
I do think, like I said earlier, it's different. It's not per se a structure, but it certainly, railroading has a lot of history that's pertinent to Louisville. Coal mining is usually what's talked about, but the grain trade and the elevator over here, the fact that this was a stop on the train, it's certainly relevant to Louisville's history. So it might be difficult in doing the assessment to get that kind of history, but I would favor us doing that. I think it'll be an interesting look at the railroad history.
One of my curiosities with it is it's currently sitting on a residential lot with the previous structure, the 1155 Pine, right? If it were to remain on that lot and 1155 Pine was sought after to be, come after historic funds to restore it and signify it as historic, it seems like as long as it was on that same lot with something that was a historic structure, it would have to play under the residential rules, is my best guess, unless it was moved yet again.
Well, and that's what Steph was saying, is that it would actually, if anything got triggered, it would actually probably become commercial. Like if they wanted to do anything. And then, is that what you're saying, is then it would be?
I'm just wondering if 1155 Pine was deemed historic and we put forth money and anything else to help with that and matching funds, then that seems to lock that in as a single family residence. And then I wonder, anything else that's associated with that lot, it seems like it would lock that lot into a single family residence. So therefore, it would seem to me that either it stays as an accessory structure on there, which is, it could be, shed, anything of that sort, but it's subordinate to the other structure, or it could possibly be on the move again. And where, nobody knows at that point. So those would be some of my concerns with it.
Leah, do you know if that property could be split, similar to, looked at a property earlier in this year which was split into two residential properties. Could this be split residential and commercial?
The 1155 Pine Street property. I mean, offhand, no, but just knowing the size of it, I would be surprised if it met. But I mean, it's commercial community, so I'm not really sure how that would work. It is not that, it's a funky size lot, and so meeting all of the access criteria and things I think would be probably difficult. I will say, for a point of clarification, I don't know if this was a question or not, Commissioner Anderson, but to your point, that might signify maybe the applicant's intent to keep it residential or something broader. I don't know that there's anything in the code that would require a residence that's landmarked to remain a residence. It could still be, as long as it met other things, right? The building code and all these other pieces. I think the use can change when you're thinking strictly of the preservation code.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back to Commissioner Haley's question about what else would we learn from this property doing an historic structure assessment. You know, and Randy's point that Randy's kind of leaning towards the commercial, the 9,000. It is a very small structure. I'm not sure it would need the full 9,000. I'm not sure if we could have it be commercial with 4,000, or at that point just go with the 4,000, right? Because, you know, I know this is getting really tricky again,
Well,
but as we tend to do here.
I can understand what you're saying. I kind of wonder if you could do something where you would say that we would, at this point, approve up to the $4,000 amount, and we would entertain, if it ended up looking like it was going to be greater than that, some other setup with it. Maybe that's what you're looking for. I don't know. It's a thought that I had sitting here amongst all this.
Right, because I'm just thinking, you know, how there's fewer building materials, there's fewer uses for it, how much is able to be learned through an assessment. Amelia, feel free to jump in.
I'm not trying to, just to give you more information, there, just a reminder that assessments can be used for what we traditionally see them as, you know, just assessments of the structure itself, its integrity and its history. But for example, with the Joe's Metal Shop that we just saw recently, part of that assessment was specifically to assess whether it could be moved. And so either through a formal condition or also just a general expectation that you could suggest to the applicant, this needs to include, if you're going to give the $9,000 and think of it as a commercial, it needs to include some part of conversation on rehabilitation. What cost would actually be incurred? I haven't seen anything like that. I can look in the records here for a moment, but that's one way to think about it as well, that you could try to ask for more from that cost in a similar way that was just done.
I just have one more question about the 1155 is residential right now, and then these are on the same exact property line, but they are commercial because they're, I guess can you have commercial and residential on the same piece of property? Does that make sense?
Right. I think these are not zoning distinctions, right, to be honest. Like the distinction between whether you're giving a commercial grant or a residential grant.
Okay, so it has nothing to do
right.
with.
This isn't all of a sudden going to
okay.
become like zoning requirement or anything.
Well, no, I'm just wondering, just down I guess just for kind of clarification of, because if someone down, like, you know, on Lafarge had the same property and they brought a caboose on it, would we, like, that's on a residential street, would we still do it as a commercial caboose? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it makes sense, yes.
Yeah, so, because I know this is a funny piece of property because it's residential but could go commercial, but it hasn't yet. And so would we treat it the same way that we would a true residential, or do we have this like gray area of being able to do both on the same property?
So staff's recommendation that it come under the commercial grant was for all the reasons that I've already described. And it is really tied to that. It's tied to the history. I mean, it has been a commercial structure its entire time in Louisville, and a vacant commercial structure, right? In addition to that, this is a funky zone district. So it's already allowed to have commercial on it, and it would, the mandatory rezoning piece I've already described. So that's certainly, again, there was a choice made here. You know, we tried to logic it out as well, that would be different than if somebody wanted to put some type of, I don't even know what that would be, but
Right.
take a small cabin and put it in their back lot and then make it an illegal use there. I mean, that wouldn't be something, that would be caught by zoning, and that's probably something we would not recommend because of exactly what you've just identified. But in this case, it's
So it's
a little more
because it's a-
dynamic.
Okay.
I mean, you could decide either way, but that's the logic for why the recommendation was what it was.
Is there a way, as you mentioned, we talked about assessing a building that we moved to find out the viability for it being moved? Can we put a condition on either a residential or a commercial assessment that would require you know, and I don't know how to exactly describe dialing up the historical assessment that we've seen already. But I think to address some of the concerns about how authentic is the history, and can we make or not, or can we support or not support a case for landmarking requirements for from a historical perspective in the probable cause?
I think the last part of that lost me a little bit. I'm sorry.
So with the monies that we would potentially allocate, could some of that be directed toward digging into the historical assessment more deeply to help confirm or deny the landmark probability from a historical perspective?
Okay, so as a blanket statement, the assessment, to what's already been spoken of, any information in the assessment can help with the landmarking, right, process. So, but I think so in that way, the general answer is that's exactly a big part of what the assessment process is meant to be. But I think your specific answer or question is like the historical part of it, because we've been talking a little bit more about the structure. You want to do more digging on the history side.
I think if I had left here without this conversation, I would say that the funds are generally for the structural assessment. And I'm asking for, can we put some of those funds for a deeper dive into the historical assessment to help support or deny a landmarking case from a historic standpoint?
Okay, yes, thank you. Yeah, so I will take a step back. I think the answer to your question is yes, absolutely. I mean, that's a huge portion of what the assessment is meant to do. In general terms, as you've all, probably many of you, if not all of you, have seen them, they often just sort of generally expand, but don't really expand too much more from what we already know. Some thoughts off the top of my head, just to step back. One piece is, I didn't mean to confuse the matter, but with the previous case that we were referencing, just for reference and not for precedent setting, there's a purchase agreement for that process, since the city currently owns that building, that requires that the assessment include the information about being able to move it. So there's actually something recorded separately that's been signed by both parties prior to probable cause saying the assessment has to include that information. So the method here would be maybe a little bit more of a suggestion, but it could also be a condition. I don't see why not, that you could say this, in order you grant $4,000 and up to $9,000 must cover historical information. I will say that's actually probably harder to get. Frankly, the number of people who have that skill set are lower in general, but it's not impossible. So anyway, so yes, this is a short answer to your question.
Keith, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, all I want to say is that I don't have a concern with the probable cause. What I'm concerned about is the structural integrity of that caboose, considering how long it's sat vacant. And I didn't realize it had wood and steel in the structure, so you have to worry about wood rot and rust. So I think the only way to determine if it's worthy of even considering a landmark, you'd have to do a structural assessment. Now, whether it's a $4,000 for residential or $9,000 for commercial, I don't know. I would think you could do it in the $4,000, determine how poor shape it is. And I might remind you that we have rejected several landmarks in the past because their condition was so poor it wasn't worth landmarking. So for me, that's a big concern. That's all I had to say.
All right, thank you.
I think on my end, if we were to move forward with approving the funds for the assessment, I would be more inclined to be in favor of it if it was the up to $4,000 portion, personally. And if there was some sort of a hardship or anything else with that, that maybe we would entertain something differently. That's just kind of where I sit. I think it does have history. I think it does warrant some deeper digging. But, you know, I have to look at the scale, size, and just oddity of this setup. So that's my opinion right now.
I think I'm with you. I think 4,000 could probably get the job done. I would also encourage the applicants to think hard about bolstering the historical discussion ahead of coming back for landmarking.
And I would like to just echo, I definitely understand your concern of having some sort of a false history with the location and everything else. I do think that even though it is not historically there, it does have, it has some warrant for going further. It's going to be trickier though, not being in its original location. If it was in its original location and we were having a lot more of these conversations, I don't think that there would be nearly the holdup in future phases that this one could have. And I'm not saying I'd go one way or the other. I don't have enough information.
Not being in the original location or the same location is almost sort of an attribute of structures in Louisville.
I can agree with that.
We move forward with approving the probable cause up to $4,000 with potentially more for hardship. Would that be as commercial? Because it seems like the likelihood is that's the direction it will go. It's not the amount of money for commercial. And Amelia, again, it seems like it could be adjusted later, whether it's commercial or residential, but we do need to choose which one we're going with.
Well, actually, go ahead.
I would do it as residential because that's what the guidelines typically are. And I don't think we're making any zoning provision right now. So I don't think that's determining what can or can't be done with the structure in the future. I think it's really just the amount of the grant.
Yeah, I would agree.
Agree.
Okay. And I'd like to make a motion to accept the Caboose probable cause grant for the $4,000 for the historic structure assessment.
Second?
I'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
No. All right. Thank you. And we will see this again. So Amelia will be in touch with you as far as getting the HSA and kind of going through the next steps. And we'll see you soon. Thank you. All right. Our next item is 1219 courtesy, which is a probable cause. And we'll have a staff report.
We're getting real familiar with the probable cause criteria here. Yeah, thanks, Travis. Okay, this is 1219 courtesy, probable cause. The location is up there on your screen. It's on Highway 42 across from the ball fields. So there's an aerial of the structure from 1962 on the left, and then there's a current photo of it on the right. So you can see, it's sort of hard here, but it's also included in your report, that the form itself looks like it really hasn't changed. And I'm gonna leave these up on the screen, and just like I said, like I've done before, talk a little bit generally here. So this structure has a number of significant ties to Louisville's social history, including, but not limited to, the fact that it's in the area that was one of the first locations for that post-war industrial development. One of the things that we've talked about previously is the downtown restaurant and sort of service industry, pulling the city into sort of a new era commercially out of the mining, after the mines began to close. And then certainly the industrial part of Louisville as well was another piece of that story. The form certainly speaks to the fact that it has an industrial history and it looks like an industrial building. However, the building has no distinguishing features or ornamentation that at least staff could find that would differentiate it really and sort of tell that story any better than sort of any other concrete block structure, again, in staff's estimation. and so there's not a lot of history about this area. There's not a lot of history about this building, at least from the architectural standpoint. And so in your report, staff looked at other instances of concrete block buildings in the state and in the National Register. And again, obviously those are different than what the criteria is for Louisville, but just as a point of reference, the only, I would say, the vast majority, if not all, of those concrete block buildings that are listed for the state of Colorado or for the National Register are ornamental concrete block. So not just this straight, but they have some type of visual interest or they have some type of facade that's in part of the block. There was one that was also technically ornamental, but it looked very similar to this building that is on the state register. It was a German POW camp at one time, in addition to being a canning factory. So that's really the closest example we could find. But I do want to note that as described in your staff report, landmarking and therefore probable cause can be given to structures that meet only one social significance, architectural significance, or geographic and environmental significance. So in this case, even though, as described in your report, staff did not find that there was architectural significance or that there was geographic and environmental significance, there is the presence of a pretty strong social significance. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about the geographic environmental piece since we don't talk about it a lot, but I'll move forward for now. I'll just note again, there's little, if any, change since at least 1962, and just to reiterate, the social significance is not just that post-war industrial development. There's a potential connection to Rocky Flats. Again, speaking about what did people do after they were working in the mines. Often, a number of them went to work at Rocky Flats. And then, of course, this is a particularly interesting history here because it's the food history of Louisville as well. And so, the connections that you read about more in the applicant's letter about the connections to the Blue Parrot, other downtown locations. And then finally, this does have multi-generational business owner and operator connections. So oftentimes we talk about the multi-generational occupancy of a residential structure. This is similar, but sort of unique in what we've reviewed, that this is currently owned by the family that's owned it for decades. And so that's another point to its social significance. So with that, staff makes this recommendation of a finding of probable cause, which would allow up to $9,000 reimbursement. This is currently used as a commercial structure. It's clearly a commercial structure. Just for the record, would like to note that this is yet another interesting structure, and that at Landmark, staff's feeling here and finding is that there would probably be a much more critical lens lended to it given the architectural piece, but that's still meeting the probable cause criteria and threshold, if you will. And then also the history of this area is not well documented, and so an assessment of the building could help to strengthen the history of an area that's important to Louisville overall. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is here and I believe does have comments.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Yeah, Amelia, geographic environmental significance. As I looked at the age and the continuity, and I get that a lot of that is covered under the social significance, but it has been a place in the industrial part of Louisville for a long time. I just wondered, did staff contemplate a qualified no or a qualified yes on that? Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because absolute no seems absolute.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, I think, mirrors the architectural significance question, and tried to represent in the staff report and in my presentation that there are multiple ways to kind of make that finality. So I do think you could say there is a qualified for both. Qualified for the architectural significance in that this building is clearly industrial, and it doesn't even really have any windows, so it speaks to that longer industrial history. And so that part is, you could say that connects well to its social history, which I know the HPC, and as staff always looking for that connection. So qualified there, even though in the report in here I am saying, staff's finding there's no architectural significance. Geographic environmental is similar. for basically the same reason, which is, yes, it's been on the landscape for a long time and it's surrounded by other industrial buildings, but in making the call towards significance, it doesn't have, in staff's estimation, again, staff's recommendation, it doesn't have any distinguishing characteristics that contribute to placemaking. This is the type of building that you would drive by next to all the other buildings and not necessarily know that you were in the presence of something that was any age in particular. Or having, oh, that's, and I'm sure that this is not true for everyone, certainly not true for, I'm sure, the applicant or others who have been in Louisville longer. But in terms of preservation and significance, placemaking is really important, being able to identify a structure by the way that it looks, and say, that's what creates the neighborhood. That's a little bit more what the geographic and environmental pieces, but certainly what you just described could qualify. It's been, like I said, it's been there for a long time, and it certainly speaks to the industrial nature of the neighborhood's history.
Yeah, I mean, probably not worth belaboring, I guess. I think about driving up and down Courtesy and Old Style Sausage. The building is a landmark. I think a lot of people would say, well, it's near that building. So I think from a geographic significance, I would say probably yes. I think the owner himself would say, architecturally, our concrete block and small glass block windows are not much to look at. Pretty underwhelming architecturally, so I think you got it right there.
I'm an environmental historian, so maybe I'm just a little precious about that as well, but yes, point taken.
Any other questions for staff? All right. We'll have the applicant, and we also have a letter from the applicant that we received that we'll submit to public record. But if you'll state your name and city of residence again.
Hopefully I don't jostle something and turn off the screen or what have. Mike Dvorsky, 601 Pine Street here in Louisville, but I spent a lot more time at 1219 Courtesy Road. My family bought the building in 1974, so come April, we'll be there 50 years at that location. As I mentioned, we were previously in what's part of the Huckleberry now. The furthest north 10 foot of that was a retail shop 52 years ago here this spring. So we've been at it for a while. 4 generations of my family have actually worked and driven a living out of Old Style Sausage, and that means a lot to me. Growing up there, having lived there as a kid, it's part of what our family is. It's our connective tissue between our family members and different parts of it. Architecturally, it's a given. It's the Lego building. Before we painted it 20 years ago, it had blue and white stripes, and it did look like it was built out of Legos. So for a while, people identified it as a Lego building too, but now they know us as Old Style Sausage. I get the question quite often, what do you do there? I mean, you don't have a retail frontage. How do you sell product? What happens there? We make about 1,500 pounds a day. We produce about 6,000 pounds a week that we ship nationally. We ship to high-end hotels throughout the nation, full pallets through distribution, and that's our gig. We've carved out a little niche there that we're proud of. We think we make the best sausage in the land, and our customers seem to reinforce that, so we're very proud of that. Our employers are as well. We've probably employed, I know hundreds, certainly not thousands like the Blue Parrot, but definitely hundreds over the last 50 years here in town. And that's something we're proud of, and that's something that my father really made a concerted effort to happen. Back in the 70s, jobs were hard to come by here. And to create jobs was really a priority for him, having sat on city council and commissions, and thank you. That's one thing I wanted to thank you for is your presence here. The multi-generational people that I know and the efforts that you make a big difference to them. They might not have a time to tell you that or ever run across you, but it means a lot to me, and it does mean a lot to them that you're making the effort to preserve what we know as our history, and moving forward what can be the next generation or two. As far as I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. You had a chance to read my letter, I'm sure, and I do appreciate you taking the time to do that. I knew you had a full plate, and Amelia mentioned that going in, so certainly I don't want to belabor the point or the effort, but it sure mean a lot to me if we could move forward on the path of considering the landmark. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? I think you're good. Thank you. All right, any public comments about this property?
I actually have one question for the
Then we'll bring it,
applicant.
oh, for the applicant?
Yeah, sorry
that's
about
fine.
that.
No, that's fine.
I read the letter before the meeting, so I'm trying to find where you said it. I don't know if we'll be able to find it while I'm up here. But you'd, in the letter, mentioned some thoughts you had for the property moving forward.
I'm sorry?
In your letter, you'd mentioned some thoughts that you had for the property moving forward.
I do, and I've got the food bug. I've always had it, being raised in Louisville, being a Polska, and, starting out making Polish sausage in our family, and the open crock dill pickles and the kraut. We still make the pickles and the kraut every year. Maybe I'm just nostalgic, but hanging on to Joe's Market. And, it took me a while to convince Arlen to sell me that equipment. And so I have all the equipment from Joe's Market. I'd love to put that to work someday in a retail setting. And, whether it's 500 square foot or more of my building to be dedicated to that, we've got a very hungry market here for a good deli and, a place you can go buy 2 or 3 selections of steak, nothing overdone, but simple. And to carry that heritage forward, the Blue Parrot noodle, somebody's going to have to carry that thing forward. And, certainly the Rizai family over at Papa Frank's are doing a great job of it, but they don't have a succession plan, and I fear for that day. And I speak to my Paisan buddies about it all the time. So I'd like to create a home for it for when that day comes. We make the Blue Parrot sausage recipe. Joni and David came on down. David is their son, and Joni certainly the matriarch of that side of the family. And they came down. We had to take 3 different tries at it to get it just right, to their family's spec. And so we've been producing that Blue Parrot sausage just before they went out of business and shut the place down. So we'd like to be carrying that noodle someday forward as well. I have a ravioli machine in the back of my building in the storage unit. It's ready to go. And so we see that we'd really like to try to gather those pieces of Louisville that once existed and recreate them and bring them back to life, including the pierogi. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
All right, I'll bring it back to discussion with the commission. Sure, of course. Just state your name and city of residence. You came on a good night.
Yeah, my name's Cody Qualls. I live in Louisville. It's fascinating to me to hear you speak and your vision. When the Blue Parrot went out of business, I want to try to speak as eloquently as I can. There's just a lot of thoughts running through my mind. The vision to have the pasta in town that we grew up with as kids. That was a staple after every soccer practice that we had. Not after everyone, but as once a week, or we hit the senior tees. Or we'd go to the Brothers 3. It's a big, that pasta was a big deal to us as residents, and to hear that you have equipment from the store. Joe's Market. So sorry, I'm a little bit overwhelmed. So Joe, I mean, I can remember being like 5 years old and going into that old rickety, shop and watching out to make sure you didn't step on nails. And I mean, there was nothing on the shelves. So to hear that you have like equipment and a vision to bring that part of Louisville into now, when, the Blue Parrot, it was amazing to me as an entrepreneur to just see that disappear. I thought, how did that not, that's a 100-year legacy of spaghetti that's so unique. How did somebody not take that to, and I've had the other stuff that they have at the Italian fair once a year. What's it called? Papa Frank's, yeah, and it's great. I mean, it tastes a lot like the Blue Parrot spaghetti. I probably couldn't tell the difference, but I just wanted to say that it touches my heart, and it's really important stuff, at least from my experience of living in Louisville. Before everything changed, there's, even though it might only be, slightly, it's not 100 years old, in the 90s, everything changed drastically. And so to have people who want to represent what it was like before then, it's really important, I think. At least that's what I want my kids to experience, that sort of thing as well. I have 4 young children, and it seems to me like all I know of Louisville is stuff he's talking about. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. It's all that stuff's so valuable to what I know of this place. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we'll bring it back for discussion again. I think this is a really interesting structure. When it's commercial, which is, we're always happy to have commercial properties come before us, but it's obviously not a Main Street structure, so that's interesting. But I think the social history is really strong, just as far as the industrial piece of Louisville, of just that change and from mining and agriculture more into industry, and just being here for multi-generations, having multi-generations being part of this company. And I think the architectural integrity, even though it's kind of more generic and not place-making, those kind of things, I think it still spoke very much to industry in Louisville. Like, we were a simple town, and we're going to have simple industry buildings. They're not going to, industrial buildings, they're not going to be ornate necessarily. So I think architecturally, I think it does have significance as far as relative to Louisville. And then, yeah, and I think the applicant brought up in the letter just the significance of it being on Highway 42, and with the development that's going to be coming, that whole landscape's going to change significantly, and it's not going to be a kind of small industrial looking highway anymore. I don't know what it's going to look like, but it'll be very different. And so I actually think this is a really creative, interesting landmark for us. So those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, there's probably a lot that's going to change with Louisville as it migrates east. You approved the moving forward with the Ironton project when the meeting I wasn't here, but it sure sounds like a good direction. There's a lot that we're going to need to consider, and I think this fits in with it, and it's a good use of our funds.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think in terms of our criteria, it certainly meets age and social significance. I agree. It does exemplify elements of architecture at the time, but I would find it less of architecturally significant, but I do find it a little more environmentally significant given where it is and and that is an important sort of industrial hub. And the physical integrity and location, yes, so I find it meets the criteria, and I'm supportive of staff's recommendation.
I'd move to approve the probable cause finding for 1219 Courtesy Road.
Second.
Do a roll call.
Commissioner Delia,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. So again, Amelia will be in touch with you just as far as next steps for your HSA, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for your time. All right, our last item is 1005 Lafarge, which is a probable cause, and we'll have a staff report.
Chair. Alrighty, so this property is already landmarked. It was landmarked in 2012. It was previously awarded a grant, but that grant did not include funds for an assessment to be completed. We recently saw one of these in this situation as well earlier this year. Staff finds that the owners are eligible for up to $4,000 in funds for an assessment. And then the language that we're referencing is quoted above. I'm happy to get into more details if you'd like. But it's landmarked, so it meets the findings or the criteria of probable cause, I think, evidently. And so staff recommends approval of a reimbursement of up to $4,000 toward the cost of a historic structure assessment. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and the applicant is here and does have a presentation.
All right. Any questions for staff?
Since this is already landmarked, would the creation of the assessment then be used for a grant for further preservation work? Or would it just be for the historical record? Or?
I think that's a great question for the applicant in this particular instance, but certainly that's one reason that somebody could apply would be that they're interested in a grant, and landmarks that have been landmarked for a while are eligible under extraordinary circumstances. So that could be one path. Another path is that this is a pretty thorough assessment and you're getting it paid for, and who wouldn't want that on their home? So I think there could be multiple different reasons, but the applicant would probably be able to speak to his plans.
Any other questions for staff? All right, thank you. We'll have a applicant presentation.
Totally up to you. They're just right here.
Okay, just click on them.
Yeah, I can stand nearby.
Yeah, thank you.
And then if you'll just state your name and city of
Yeah, my
residence
name's
again.
Cody Qualls. I live in Louisville, Colorado. I live in this home at 1005 Lafarge. I recently, my father has decided to move to Idaho to be with my brother and his family, so he has gifted us this home here in Louisville, which is honestly the only reason that my family can live in this town. It's changed so drastically in the economic environment. So I'm very, very grateful to be here and be able to even have this conversation with you about this property. My brother landmarked it in 2012. And so in recently stepping into the home with my 4 young children, just, looking around, and one of the reasons my dad gifted it to us was because he didn't have the energy to invest into the home and take care of it. So as I come into it, I see a lot of these cracks that you see before you. These cracks are in, I could come back and show you another time, but these cracks are in every room of the house. I didn't want to take up too much of your time, but I think there's one more on the other side of the, this is the south-facing side of the home. If I go back here, sorry, I think I got this. Yeah, this is the front of the home, and these are different rooms on the ceilings. So my long-term thoughts were, well, if so the reason this came up was we remodeled the bathroom just so that we could use it because it was in really, really bad shape. And then not having a ton of experience being a homeowner in this type of this old of a home, I was like, whoa, if the foundation goes more janky, like this bathroom could get really messed up. And, we spent a considerable amount of money getting it fixed. And so I thought, well, I don't want to continue to, take care of this house if I don't know, like I don't want to fix the stuff on top if I don't know what's on the bottom. Looking in, just making a few phone calls, that looked very, very expensive to even begin the process. And so I started kind of having conversations with Amelia, learned that there was possibly a grant for such a thing, and wanted to appeal to the city to see if it was interested in helping us, learn more about the structure, learn if it was worth trying to fix the foundation, or if it's already settled. If it's already settled, then great, then we can just improve. I'm probably not gonna fix it all up, and I can just take care of the house and know that I'm improving the inside and the outside of this structure as the land market is and feel confident in my investment. But right now it's a little shaky to want to take care of the landmark, not knowing if it's going to continue to shift and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? And so did this house, you said it did receive a grant already?
Yep, so I don't have it in front of me. I'm happy to pull up the amount, but it was back in the day when the amounts were much smaller, and looked through that list just to make sure that assessment wasn't
Part of
covered and
it,
wasn't.
sure. Okay, thank you. All right, I don't think we have any questions. Oh, did you have a question?
For staff, not for the applicant.
Okay.
Thanks.
We'll let you know if we have any other ones.
So just to clarify, the assessment would just be for the assessment, not for the remediation.
Correct.
And all of these grants are taxable, correct?
Yes. Yes, they are.
Okay. I just want to make sure the applicant was aware of that.
If you don't mind coming to the mic, I'm sorry, we're recorded, so it has to be on public record.
I don't do
That's
this.
a good question.
I don't do this very often, so I apologize for any lack of respect of protocol.
No problem. No, it's just, as I understand it, any grant given by the HPC is taxable as ordinary income to the applicant.
Okay.
So you'll treat it as $2,000 of extra income on your taxes, or $4,000 or whatever the grant is.
I see. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm self-employed, so I will figure it out. But I appreciate it. I didn't know that, and I'm glad I know now.
It's a detail a lot of people might not know.
No, it's very appreciated. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's good
And as
information.
the applicant could certainly be, we could vote in favor of this, and then you could think about it and always decline it if you so wanted with that information.
All right, any comments from the public? All right, we'll bring it back for commission discussion.
The city already has a commitment to this historic house, and that it's landmarked. So we have I think a vested interest in learning more about its condition so that the current owner can maintain and update the structure as needed. So I'd be in favor of supporting this historic structure assessment.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's pretty straightforward, like everything qualifies, and it's money that they haven't already had, so I'm fully in support of this.
I make a motion that we approve the grant up to $4,000 the staff recommends for, I'll get the correct address, 1005 Lafarge.
I'll second that.
We'll do a roll call, please.
All right, Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller. One moment. Commissioner Keller, how do you vote?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I had already said yes, but I must have had it muted.
I think it was our fault. Thank you. Chair Haley.
Yes. All right. So thank you, and Amelia will be in touch with you for next steps as far as HSA reimbursement. And for both of you, actually, if you need, she can kind of, we have not recommended, but professionals that if you need help kind of navigating that, staff can help you with that as well. So any questions you have, we can do that for you. All right. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks
Thank
for
you.
sitting through our long meeting. That's good. You can come back anytime. Thank you. All right, and the next item is our work plan and subcommittee updates.
Chair, do you mind if I just loop these in together with items from staff?
Absolutely. We love looping.
Okay. All right, so we had one alteration certificate that was released for a detached garage. No demolition reviews completed since the last meeting. And I've got a couple things. My last slide is upcoming schedule, but I did want to stop and relatively informally just talk about the year behind and the year ahead. So just some quick stats, and I know we're at 2 hours, so I'll try to keep this brief, but I think it's interesting actually. So we had, I think 5 landmarks this year, which is pretty incredible. It's all people coming to the HPC and to the city as well, so that's pretty neat. 13 alteration certificates. The average review time on those was 6 days, so that's actually pretty good. 10 demolition reviews. Of course, just a reminder, those run the gamut from small to full scrapes. During Preservation Month, we had a pretty sizable turnout for our landmark ceremony, and then we also had the scavenger hunt that we partnered with the museum to get the word out about preservation. We completed the Paleo West survey, which had very little to do with any of us, but it was wonderful that it got completed after 3 years, I think. And then on the work plan, you know, we all know what happened in the middle of the year here, and it's really all down to me falling off the wagon, but we still did have some successes. So for the first time in a couple years, we have met and actually exceeded our HPC training requirements. So that's down to people attending Saving Places and then also attending webinars and watching these videos over the year. So that's really exciting. We completed the coloring book project in a way that we did not expect, but in the way that I think maybe needed to happen. So we have some really good coloring images that may be repurposed in the future, but have already been used at events, and the kids have absolutely loved them. And it turns out all of that work that the HPC that you all did, trying to figure out whether kids cared about tiny lines or big lines, they don't care at all about anything. This is how they color. So we also had a few social media posts. In particular, you know, that we didn't hit the number in the process that was originally planned, but our Preservation Month presence was really strong. So let's count that as a win. We did not get to the user experience surveys or the report on barriers, which of course would have been coming in handy for our upcoming conversations, but I do think still has some solid groundwork in terms of ideas there. And then the Blue Parrot sign, also, you know, no next steps there, but I think we learned that there's general interest still and that it's complicated, which we already knew the latter. And I, for one, didn't really know that there was still interest from some other parts of the city in using it on a long-term project. So congratulations. It's part of a work plan completed. So 2024, a couple of things. So on the work plan, of course, you know, we haven't started this conversation yet. Wanted to start it actually after having our retreat. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's say we get the retreat scheduled for January, have a draft of the work plan, kind of like what we did this past year, which, sticky notes and try to prioritize things. And then with the goal of adopting it in February. So the main things on there are to complete the January retreat and then to have that to feed into the grant updates. There are some smaller projects, but I think that's the big one that we've discussed and that could be adopted by HPC. And then, another thing that's going to be pretty busy in planning, we've got a lot of long-range plans going on right now, which is exciting and also kind of overwhelming depending on the day. But a few things that HPC will, in all likelihood, be asked to review and give some deep thought to. One is the Louisville Downtown Vision Plan, which I talked about briefly last month. I'm happy to talk about it more if anybody wants to stay afterwards. But, we're still working on how HPC will be a part of that, but I would anticipate at least one meeting of reviewing the plan and with your eye toward historic sensitivity and design, and then also historic interpretation. Then Louisville Comprehensive Plan, you'll have a kickoff meeting on that just to learn what it is, what its scope is, what the process will look like for 2 years. That's slated actually currently for February. So you'll be seeing Jeff again, I'm sure, to talk about that. And also then the Old Town Overlay, long may it continue to be on the list of things to do. It's very important. I also do want to just mention that I think this is Jeff Hurt's first meeting here. He's our new planning manager. He's been here for like 4 or 5 months. Don't mean to put you on the spot. But you'll see him a couple times next year at least, probably, and glad that you're here tonight. Welcome to Monday nights, third Monday nights. Okay, and then finally, upcoming schedule. So I'm gonna finish my presentation. You can adjourn the meeting, and then I'm gonna run up to you for those of you I haven't heard from and try to coordinate these last 2 dates. And then we already talked about the retrospective, and then the plan for putting together a work plan. So that's all of my information.
Thank you. All right, any updates from commission members do we need to know about? Seeing none.
Well, I always have to make a comment. And we'll probably talk about this when we're able to have a retreat, but there are so many pieces that are moving right now, and all of these applicants were excited about the history of the town. The town is moving a bit to the east with several of these projects, the sausage factory and the Ironton project. Now maybe there'll be a train station here. The place where the caboose is being considered on its effect as a gateway into the town. The revitalization, the signing, the signage that was underway. I think all of these things kind of play together, and I'm excited we're going to have a chance to talk about some of those things and let the history aid some of those things happening, I think. Anyway.
All right, any other updates? All right, next item is to adjourn.
What did we? Is the retreat happening both of those dates?
No, those are the 2 dates. It will happen one of those dates. I am very hopeful.
I see. Okay.
That is the quick run up here.
Yes.
It's the quick run up here.
All right,
Can I?
Make a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting?
No, I was going to do that.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you and good night.
Wait, Keith, before you go, now that we've adjourned, are you available? Can you email me or can you tell me now? Do you know if you're available the 3rd Monday or the 4th Monday or the 5th Monday in January?
Yeah, I'll make whatever one you decide on, Amelia.
Okay, Keith, thank you.
Well, everybody else is probably more reliable than I am on being here, so
Okay, we'll do. Thank you.
I'll make it work.
Thanks, Keith.
All right, you bet.
Bye.
Hallelujah, the Leonard Cohen song, where his band does it, and up on Lafarge. No.
Recording
With
stopped.
he's the face band. But they did a, yeah, look it up, it's Hallelujah, and it's like through the gateway or something. It was a Red Rock concert, and at one point it swirls around and goes through the Hollywood. You know, it's up on Lafarge. Anyway,